Addicts, welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Glad you guys are joining us tonight for our early game start sits, talking through all the predictions for week 4. Now, quick thing I just want to note before we get too far into it, you guys are wondering, there obviously is the situation brewing right now in Tennessee. We had, 8 members of the Tennessee Titans, 2 or 3 players, and the remainder from their training staff positive test for COVID-19. We probably got a little bit too optimistic, thinking we weren't going to have to deal with this again for the remainder of the year. So fortunate that it's only one team. Looks like the Minnesota Vikings got cleared. So it looks like that game between the Vikings and the Texans is on schedule. Nothing going to change there, but the Steelers and Titans game, as it stands right now, is being postponed, but they're saying that they're likely to play either Monday night or possibly even Tuesday night. So that means a lot of different things for fantasy. I know with like Sleeper, they are going to count the game towards week 4, which is the way it should be done, even if it is done on a Tuesday night. I know that's a weird night, not a game night that you normally see football being played on, but I didn't want to talk about that game tonight because we don't know yet when it's actually going to happen, or everything that's going to surround that situation. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more information tomorrow, which with each day we should hopefully know a little bit more. So I'm pushing that one to tomorrow's stream to talk about it, especially since it is going to be one of the later games now. Didn't want to talk about it in this one. So if you're wondering where is the Steelers and Titans game, know that it is coming in tomorrow's stream where we go over the late games. But let's get into this and start talking about these early games. Very interesting slate here. Some good competitive games. We're going to learn a lot about some teams this week and see who are the pretenders and who are for real. Also, just in terms of how we've been doing, in week 2, we were 13-3 in heads up picks. Last week, we were 11-4-1, also 10-6 against the spread. Not doing as well in the over-under department. I will work better on that, but over 60% in the other department. So we're going to trying to keep that fire up and giving you guys the best projections that we can. And obviously, those only mean so much, but they do give us a semblance of an idea of what it means for fantasy. So that's why we kind of use that as the parameter or the framework to come up with who we're actually starting and sitting each week. And, for the most part, it's pretty easy to tell. You get into the nitty gritty, the nuanced players when injuries start happening. But for the most part, we're not going to overthink this. So let's start with the Thursday night game if we have to. We've got the Denver Broncos versus the New York Jets, 2 0-3 teams. The Broncos devastated by injuries to Drew Lock, Cortland Sutton, Von Miller, other players on their defense, just dealing with injuries across the board. Philip Lindsay potentially returning this week, but absolutely decimated. New York Jets also dealing with some injuries as well, but their issues, I think, are more rooted in their organization and their talent versus the Broncos. I'm completely chalking up their failures to injury right now. So 2 0-3 teams. One of these teams is either going to get a win or we'll have another Bengals-Eagles situation where we get a tie. Well, this game started out with an over-under of below 40. It's actually creeped up to 40. And right now, the Jets are actually favored to win. That's probably going to be the only time you hear that said this year. Jets are favored to win this game by 1.5 points. So right now, you have an implied point total of both teams scoring roughly 20 points, and it could go either way. 1.5 is essentially saying it's a heads-up pick. So the Broncos are actually giving up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends right now. They've been a bit stingier against running backs. Doesn't really matter in this case because there's not many players on the Jets that we're even considering at this point, but something to note, at least number 5 to the wide receiver position is something that we want to target, whereas the Jets have been okay at stopping quarterbacks and wide receivers. They've given up the 5th most points to fantasy running backs and have been average against the tight end. So all that being said, there's not a lot of players that you want to be playing in this game. We've had some pretty fun Thursday night games. Last week was super interesting between the Dolphins and the Jaguars. We had a really good game between the Bengals and the Browns. So this is a disappointing way to start week 4, but there's a chance that it could still end up being an interesting game. In terms of fantasy, though, there's really not much to talk about. On the Broncos side, even if Philip Lindsay comes back, we're still going to throw Melvin Gordon out there. As I mentioned, the Jets are surrendering the 5th most points to running backs. The Broncos are starting Brett Ripien at quarterback, so they're going to run the ball like crazy. This is going to be, please save us, Melvin Gordon. You are our only hope kind of game. Jerry Jeudy, I guess you consider starting him, but I'm trying to avoid pass catchers in this offense. Noah Fant, I think you kind of have to start at this point. We've seen every single year, it seems like there's going to be a ton of tight ends that do really well, and then it always seems to come right back around, and we only have a couple guys that we can really trust. Noah Fant has been the only, well, not the only, but one of the few consistent guys that you drafted later that's had good weeks each week consecutively. Him and Jonnu Smith right now are both in that department. So Noah Fant is pretty much a must start at this point. Even in this gross situation, they're going to have to throw the ball somewhat. He could still find a way to sneak a touchdown in for you. So I'm starting both Gordon and Fant. Of course, you're going to be starting the Broncos defense in this one. Starting a defense against the Jets has been a way for fantasy gold throughout this season, and I don't see that trend changing here at all. As we mentioned, really trying to avoid any of the other pass catchers here. Jerry Jeudy could be okay, but I think his floor is so low, you really don't want to start your week off this early unless you absolutely have to. I would avoid playing Jerry Jeudy or KJ Hamler. I'm not going to throw Brett Ripien out there, even though it's the Jets defense. And even if Philip Lindsay plays, I'm not going to throw him back in the lineup just yet. Want to see how he looks coming off of that toe injury. We're not starting Royce Freeman if Lindsay is out. On the Jets side, it is looking positive for Jamison Crowder to return. Last time we saw Jamison Crowder, he was targeted an absurd 13 times. He had a very good fantasy day, over 24 fantasy points against the Bills. The Broncos' pass defense is arguably a good bit worse than the Bills, especially due to all the injuries that they've suffered. There's going to at least be one receiver that comes through. That seems to be the MO for the Jets thus far. We saw Braxton Berrios go off last week, but if Jamison Crowder is in, I'm playing him. I trust that he's going to continue to see the ridiculous target share and should give you a pretty decent floor and a nice ceiling there in PPR. It's gross as well, but if you absolutely need a defense, I think you can start the Jets defense in this one. You know, both of these teams, this should be a pretty low-scoring game. If Crowder is in, I'm probably out on Braxton Berrios or anyone else. We're not starting any of the running backs here. We're not starting Sam Darnold. Pretty easy decision there for me. I have the Jets winning this one 17-12. It's going to be a low-scoring affair. Again, trying to avoid playing as many players as we can in this one. There will still be a few fantasy options, but overall, pretty gross game here. And unfortunately for Jets fans, because it looks like if the Jets are to lose this one, Adam Gase may actually be gone by the end of week 4. So, you know, for fantasy and for the Jets fan base, we're probably rooting for the Broncos, but I think the Jets pull this one out and get their first victory on the season. Jets 17-12. Jumping over and talking about the Saints and the Lions, a higher over-under on the week. Should be a very good, high-scoring game. We saw the Lions get up their first win against the high-scoring Cardinals last week, coming off the backs of 3 interceptions by Kyler Murray, whereas Drew Brees and the Saints lost their second consecutive game to the Packers. Well, they didn't lose 2 games to the Packers, but they lost their second consecutive game on the season, losing to the Packers on Sunday night, and that was in the Superdome. This is on the road. Looks like Michael Thomas will be back, so this should be a pretty fun game to watch. We've got both Kenny Golladay and Michael Thomas returning. And, you know, we got a 54.5 over under. I believe that is the highest on the week. If not, I'm sorry, take that back. Second highest on the week, at least in the early games. So very high over under, expecting this to be one of the more profitable games for fantasy football purposes. Saints are slated to win this one by 4. And, you know, based on what we've seen, this defense has not been nearly as disruptive as we've seen in the past couple years. They're giving up the 6th most points to quarterbacks. They've been good at slowing down the running backs and the wide receivers. There's 19th against the run and 27th against the receivers. But where the Saints have really struggled has been against the tight end. We saw Darren Waller absolutely torch them in week 2. We saw O.J. Howard score a touchdown in week 1. We saw Robert Tonyan and Jace Sternberger do some work against them. And Mercedes Lewis scored a touchdown against the Saints in week 3 for the Packers. So without Devontae Adams, the Packers pivoted to the tight ends and followed suit with what the Raiders showed us they could do with Darren Waller. So the Saints defense needs to tighten up against the tight end. With that being said, based on the information we have, it looks like this is going to be a smash TJ Hawkinson week, especially for DFS. On the Lions side, the Lions are giving up the seventh most points to quarterbacks and running backs, 11th most points to wide receivers. They've been a little tighter against the tight end. We're also dealing with an injury to Jared Cook. Looks like he's going to play. Not sure if he'll be limited at all. So, of course, you're starting Alvin Kamara. You don't need me to tell you that. I think Breeze is an okay start in this game. Just based on the over-under, based on what we're expecting this to be, yes, Breeze's arm looks like a noodle out there. His average depth of target has dropped multiple yards, even after being like 31st or 32nd for multiple years in a row. Now it's like so far and clear the lowest in the NFL. It's beginning to get concerning, but that being said, Alvin Kamara has been able to make up for it with the amount of receptions he's been getting and how elusive he is in open field. And if Michael Thomas is back, even if he's somewhat hobbled, I still think Drew Brees can have a pretty good game in this one. I'm nervous about starting any other option here. Maybe Traquan Smith, maybe Emmanuel Sanders if you are in desperate need. One of those guys likely to score a touchdown, but who do you pick between them? We saw Traquan Smith have a decent game in week 2, and then Miles Sanders rebounded and had the touchdown in week 3. So it's kind of a guess at this point. Jared Cook, as we mentioned, dealing with an injury, may not even go this week. Haven't really seen the practice reports for him yet. We'll have to monitor that going into the week, but the Lions are a little bit stronger against tight ends. I would probably try to find a better option if you have one. And I'm probably going to try to avoid playing the Saints defense until they show us that they actually still have that same shutdown potential that they've had in years past. On the Lions side, we saw Matt Stafford look a lot better with Kenny Golladay. Now, Kenny Golladay most likely to be shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore, but after we saw Allen Lazard go off against this defense, I'm not sure that we can really count on the Saints defense being that shutdown team that we've seen in the past. So Kenny Golladay, maybe you have to lower him in your rankings slightly, but I think you're still starting him. Marvin Jones, still a good start in this one. And then, as we mentioned, Saints are the worst team in terms of slowing down the tight end. So TJ Hawkinson is a smash play. Hopefully they don't pull more shenanigans and bring Jesse James out for red zone targets again. That was absolutely just, it makes no sense. But hopefully TJ Hawkinson sees those targets this week. I'm not going to play Jesse James by any means, but I think TJ Hawkinson has a really good game in this one. We're not touching any of the running backs here. The Saints' run defense has at least been a little bit better than their pass defense thus far through the season. And, with Adrian Peterson getting the majority of the looks, but DeAndre Swift getting the majority of the passing game looks, it's a bad situation to start running backs because at any point, Kerryon Johnson could end up getting a goal line carry. So you really don't know who's going to start each week in and out. So the Lions and Ravens, very similar situation right now, avoiding that running back situation like the plague. Danny Amendola, if you're in an absolute desperate situation, he's continuing to get targets, but last week he got the first catch of the day and then didn't see anything for the rest of the day other than a missed red zone target. So not looking forward to that and not playing the Lions defense either. But I think this will be a game that the Saints get right. The Saints should win this one pretty decisively. I have them winning by 7. Saints 28 to Lions 21. All right, and jumping over and talking about the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we've seen now 2 games with Justin Herbert. Hasn't been able to get his first win yet, but has revitalized this offense. After week 1, everyone was panicking about Austin Eckler. Keenan Allen looked terrible with Tyrod Taylor there. Tyrod Taylor, gets pulled out right before the game against the Chiefs in week 2 due to a medical mistake that was made by the training staff there. Justin Herbert gets the call, and he looks good against the Chiefs. He played okay against the Panthers last week, threw a pick, and there were quite a few fumbles that weren't his fault. That kept the Panthers able to, stay in command of that game. But, they were within striking distance at the very end of that game. So the Chargers have looked good on offense. They did lose Chris Harris Jr. for 6 weeks, so that's another devastating blow to their secondary, which has been one of the strengths of this team. We'll see how that ends up playing into the way that they play. Whereas on the Buccaneers side, we have Chris Godwin is going to be out for this week and possibly a couple more. And a news report that just came up like an hour ago. I don't know the extent of the injury, but it's looking like Leonard Fournette pulled something up over this week where it looks like he may even be out. So, some big named injuries here on the Buccaneers side that will change the way that we attack this offense for fantasy purposes. So in terms of the way that Vegas is slating this game to go, they don't believe in the Chargers at all. They've got the Buccaneers winning this by 7, a little bit lower over-under on the week, 43.5. Chargers have been pretty good at slowing down fantasy opposition. 15th against quarterbacks, 28th against running backs. Very good at slowing down opposing running backs, but Mike Davis did have a good game last week. Good at slowing down the wide receivers and tight ends as well, whereas the Buccaneers have been pretty much the same, kind of flipped it. I mean, they have played some very good running backs thus far. They played Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, so of course we'd expect the running back points that they allow to be up a little bit higher. So I think this is still an anomaly. We saw the Buccaneers defense last year was really good at slowing down the run and not great at slowing down the pass. It's kind of been the reverse this year. We'll see if that trend continues through week 4. But overall, I think this will be a lower scoring game. So we'll have to kind of temper our expectations for there to be massive blow up games. But there are plenty of solid players here to go after. Of course, we're going to be throwing Austin Ekeler out there after catching 11 passes last week. That was exactly what we wanted to see. Justin Herbert has brought back the screen game and the dump-off, check-down passes that Austin Ekeler needed to have the fantasy value that he was being drafted for. This is what gave him the ability to finish in the top 5 at the running back position last year, was the fact that he was so involved in the passing game. Yes, he's efficient on the ground, but for whatever reason, Anthony Lynn isn't going to give him north of 200 carries. He needed that passing work, and it looks like he's getting it back. So great news for Austin Ekeler. Fire him up every week until he proves otherwise. Keenan Allen looks like he's back into the wide receiver 1 category. Had over 12, I believe, 11 or 12 targets last week, but double-digit targets is exactly what you want to see for Keenan Allen. Mike Williams is still dealing with an injury there, may not even suit up this week. So Keenan Allen, of course, you're going to be starting him. And then Hunter Henry, this could be another really good week for him. He's been consistently targeted, just hasn't come through in the red zone department yet for a touchdown. So pretty easy to say we're going to start Ekeler, Allen, and Henry. Josh Kelly is the one that I'm on the fence. So as we mentioned before, the Buccaneers look like they've kind of shifted their philosophy and have been stronger against the pass than they have against the run. But if the Buccaneers are able to get off to a hot start and actually score some points, Josh Kelly is going to get game scripted out. We saw that last week. If we're talking about, okay, what happened to Josh Kelly in week 3? Well, replay back the way week 1 and week 2 went. In week 1 and week 2, the Chargers were in control of the game, or at least within striking distance throughout the entire game. In week 3, they committed multiple turnovers, let the Panthers run the score up on them at the beginning, and they were slowly chipping away, trying to come back towards the end. That is not a game script that is conducive to a guy like Josh Kelly getting involved. He's not nearly as involved in the pass game. That is Eckler's work. So if the BUCS come out to a hot start, you could see Josh Kelly get relegated out of fantasy relevance again. For that reason, I'm avoiding him this week if I can. He's still a decent option, and I would not drop him by any means because they will have more game scripts where they are able to stay in control. But against a stronger team like the Buccaneers, I don't expect them to be able to, command a lead in this game. So Josh Kelly could end up having a pretty poor fantasy performance again. I guess you could talk me into starting Justin Herbert, but he hasn't shown enough from a fantasy lens to prove to me, and at least in a 1 quarterback league, that I need to be throwing him out there. There's so many other guys on waivers you can probably pick up this week, namely guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick, that I would not be going out of my way to start Justin Herbert. In a 2 quarterback league, I can see why. Jumping over to the BUCS side. So with Godwin out, we know Evans is going to eat. Yes, this is a stronger team against wide receivers, but Mike Evans has historically done really well whenever Godwin is out. We saw him go off against the Panthers in week 2, who had also been decent against receivers up to this point. And again, with Chris Harris out, Derwin James out for the season, I'm not as afraid of this Chargers secondary to this point. So I think Mike Evans has a pretty good game this week. Now, we mentioned in the little tease to start this that Fournette could be out. It's not determined yet. There's no complete concrete status on that yet. But if Leonard Fournette does not play this game, then I do have confidence in starting Ronald Jones. If that does not happen, if Leonard Fournette is active, you cannot start any running back on this team because it's going to be so game script dependent. Who has the hot hand? Who do they want to put in the right situation? LaShawn McCoy is still getting a lot of passing down targets, so it's been an incredibly frustrating situation because all of these guys could be great fantasy assets if there's some consolidation towards one guy getting the majority of the touches, but that has not been the case thus far. So my plan is, if Fournette is out, I am totally comfortable throwing in Ronald Jones as my RB2. If Fournette is in, I'm not touching this backfield, and I'm waiting it out until there's either an injury, a trade, or something that changes in the way that this backfield is constructed before I trust throwing any of those guys in my lineup. I think the Buccaneers defense is going to be one of the better plays on the week. We saw this team commit multiple turnovers last week, and Buccaneers were able to stomp out the Broncos last week in a similar fashion. So Buccaneers defense at home, love them a lot this week. Now, Brady had a pretty good game, 3 touchdowns last week. We'll see if he can reprise that here. I don't know that he'll need to do as much this week, and nothing even had to do that much last week. But I think this game will be closer, but also lower scoring. So I don't see the need to throw Brady back into my lineup unless I'm just stuck at the quarterback position. You could talk me into throwing Scott Miller out there in the absence of, Chris Godwin being out, but I would be much more comfortable playing Scott Miller if Justin Watson is out. He's also dealing with a shoulder injury, I believe. It looks like it's mild, so I don't think Watson is going to be missing this game. So I'm probably trying to avoid those options. But if you're in a rut, you absolutely need to play. Scott Miller is an interesting name to throw out there this week. Not playing LaShawn McCoy until he actually shows that he can put up a decent fantasy game. And I'm not going to be touching the tight ends here until they get that situation figured out. Overall, I have the Bucs winning this one. Like I said, it's going to be closer, a lower scoring game, but I got the Bucs winning 21-17 over the Chargers. If you guys want to as well, feel free to ask any comments. I can comment on them between the start sits, so please, feel free to do so. And let's jump in and talk about the Jaguars and the Bengals. Now, another interesting game here. We saw last week that the Jaguars had a lot of hype. They looked really good through 2 weeks, and then they came out and got punched in the mouth when they faced the Dolphins on Thursday night. Bengals, on the other hand, have been trending upwards. Yes, they haven't gotten their win yet. They forced a tie against the Philadelphia Eagles, but Joe Burrow has been looking really good. That has been the bright spot of this team. Their defense hasn't been great. It's been average, and their offensive line play has been pretty bad. So Joe Burrow has been single-handedly keeping this team in games. They get to come back to Cincinnati to play a Jaguars team that at this point we kind of really don't know what they are. So lots of interesting names to talk about here. Let's get into it. Jaguars, Bengals, over-under in this one, 48.5. So middle ground, a little bit above average this week. Bengals are favored to win this one by 3, and I think that's fair at home. That's typically what you want to see. Like, I think you get, on average, a 3-point bonus just being at home. So this is basically heads up, but Bengals at home, we're going to give them a 3-point spread. Now, in terms of fantasy points allowed, the Jaguars are allowing the 5th most points to quarterbacks and tight ends. Also 14th most points allowed to running backs. They've been a little bit better against receivers, 24th on the league, whereas the Bengals have actually been pretty good at stopping quarterbacks, but again, I think that's a little skewed. So week 1, we saw Tyrod Taylor do nothing. Week 3, we saw Carson Wentz be Carson Wentz. And in week 2, we saw Baker Mayfield have a pretty decent game where he moved the ball pretty decisively, just didn't have like this massive fantasy game because they were running the ball so much. So I think that's a little misleading right there. The Bengals are allowing a lot of points to the running back, so fire up James Robinson this week. And for those same reasons that we mentioned with the quarterback, wide receiver kind of follows. So I'm kind of ignoring the fact that the Bengals have been decent against the pass thus far. I think we can at least wait another week. That being said, if DJ Chark is out, this offense looked really bad without DJ Chark. Outside of James Robinson, there was literally nothing else to help Gardner Minshew out there. So I think, they lost DJ Chark halfway through the week, kind of had to reshape their game plan. It was already a short week. So I'm just going to chalk up the fact that DJ Chark was out for the reason that the Jaguars were so disjointed last week. So I think their offense will rebound and have a stronger performance here in week 4. That being said, I don't really know that you can trust anyone outside of Robinson. And if Chark is out, I mean, you can go back to the well and throw Cole back into your lineup. But we saw when Chark was gone, Keelan Cole was getting the majority of the defensive looks. Chris Conley basically cratered this team, multiple drops in this game against the Dolphins. So I'm out on Chris Conley. Laviska Shenault still looks good, but he's not getting nearly enough touches to warrant a fantasy start. Chris Thompson had some decent receptions last week, but he's really only going to be fantasy relevant if the Jaguars are being routed. So if the game is close, Chris Thompson is not the running back you want to have in there. So of course you're starting James Robinson. He's the number 5 running back in PPR right now. He's going to have another top 10 week here against the Bengals. And if DJ Chark is healthy, if he's playing, I will still throw him out there. We're still waiting for that breakout game. He's been okay, but nothing great for PPR. I think if he plays this week against the Bengals defense, he has a pretty good game. Not going to throw anyone else out there on the Jaguars side. On the Bengals side is where it gets a little bit interesting. Burrow is a great start this week. We saw Ryan Fitzpatrick play well against the Jaguars, and Burrow has been a really good fantasy producer. He's actually, as hard as it is to believe, he's outscoring Lamar Jackson in fantasy points right now. Now, that being said, don't start Burrow over Lamar Jackson. We're expecting Lamar Jackson to rebound and play well against Washington this week. But if you need a starter, if you have been disappointed, like if you have Matt Stafford, you've just been bugged that he hasn't been putting up a lot of points, you probably can find Joe Burrow on your waiver wire this week and you throw him right into your lineup and play him against the Jaguars. Should be a good start for him. Now, the biggest contention here is Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has definitely underperformed from where he's been drafted. Like, there's no other way of saying that. But he's continued to see the touches. He's run more routes than Giovanni Bernard. He's been involved in red zone carries, just hasn't been able to punch it into the end zone yet. And this is kind of how his season started last year. He was like on the verge of, there were people reporting of dropping him and saying, do I actually pick up Joe Mixon or do I just let him sit on the waiver wire for someone else to worry about? And, for the first 8 weeks or so of the season, Joe Mixon only had like 1 or 2 startable fantasy games. I think we're seeing that same trend happen. And as this offensive line gels a little bit more, we still have, this is a non-cohesive unit. We had 2 big pieces that were out last year, and hopefully as the season goes on, they'll gel a little bit better. I think better days are ahead for Joe Mixon, and they could start as early as the week against the Jaguars. We saw Myles Gaskin have a good game against the Jaguars last week. Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines lit him up in week 1. They were able to slow down Derrick Henry, but I think you can trust Joe Mixon one more time. And I know it's difficult to say that because he's been garbage up to this point, but probably don't have a better option. And even if you do, you're probably convincing yourself that Joe Mixon is worse than he actually is. I'm throwing Joe Mixon back into my lineup. And of course, we're going to start Tyler Boyd. He's been the number 1 receiving option for Joe Burrow, at least in terms of fantasy production. And then the interesting question comes to, are we starting AJ Green or are we starting T. Higgins? I'm still going to stick with AJ Green for 1 more week. And I know this could burn me, but last week AJ Green was shadowed by Darius Slay. Darius Slay basically covered him the entire game, and that allowed Joe Burrow to target guys like Boyd and Higgins, who were covered by much less talented cornerbacks. So my contention is, why would the Eagles shadow AJ Green if they weren't worried about him? Could just be a narrative that I could be completely wrong on, but again, NFL teams, if they truly felt that AJ Green was washed, then they would have left him alone and they would have shadowed Boyd or Higgins. So that also being said, the Jaguars don't really have anyone to shadow. So assuming this game goes as we're expecting it to go, I'm comfortable starting Green, and I think Higgins might be a mirage. He had the 2 touchdowns last week, and he did run more routes than both Boyd and Green, but he didn't see anywhere near the targets that Boyd has been seeing. Green has seen a ton of targets through the year as well. So until we actually see some consistent performances from Higgins, I'm comfortable picking him up off the waivers, but I'm probably not going to start him this week. We're not starting Drew Sample after only getting 1 target last week. Watch him go off for 10 receptions this week, but you just can't take the risk with that floor. We're not going to start either defense in this game. So that's my take on it. I think the Bengals will win this one. I got them winning 24-21, getting the exact line that they're given from Vegas. I think this will be a competitive game, decently high scoring, not a shootout by any means, but should be a pretty fun game to watch. All right, let's jump over and talk about the Minnesota Vikings and the Houston Texans. This would be an interesting one. We got 0-3 Vikings, 0-3 Texans, 2 teams that came into the season with aspirations of winning their division. The Vikings finished second in the division last year. Texans won the AFC South, and both of these teams have gotten off to a really, really rocky start. So lots weighing on this game for either of these teams to try to turn their season around. I think it might be too late for both of them at this point, but whoever wins this one at least has a chance of turning things around, whereas starting 0-4, I And I don't know that I'm sure there's statistics out there, but I don't know that there's any team that's come back from an 0-4 start to actually do anything significant with their season. So if anyone knows that, you can feel free to comment and educate me. But whoever loses this game is probably done and is going to go full scale tank mode. So that being said, who's going to end up winning this game? Right now, Vegas favors the Texans by 4.5. This is a 54.5 over under. Both of these teams are just absolutely decimated on defense, not playing defense well at all. The Vikings are allowing the 8th most points to running backs, the 4th most points to receivers. The Texans are allowing the 4th most points to running backs. So this is going to be a really good week to start a lot of fantasy options in this game. I am fully on board with this being a shootout. I think the over could very easily be a hit in this one. We've seen Kirk Cousins kind of open it up a little bit because he has to, because that defense isn't playing well. He's throwing a lot of picks, which sucks, but he at least was able to move the ball around last week. We saw Dalvin Cook come alive again, so I think this could be a very good offensive battle. So with that being said, we're starting Dalvin Cook, we're starting Adam Thielen, and I'm comfortable throwing Justin Jefferson out there. Different situation than it is with Higgins. Justin Jefferson was drafted to replace Stephon Diggs. Olabisi Johnson is a good NFL player, but nothing special in terms of true raw talent on the field. It was only a matter of time before Justin Jefferson was able to usurp him as the number 2 option. And this team desperately needed a wide receiver too. And I think this is good news for Adam Thielen, especially because Adam Thielen historically has played better when he's able to stay in the slot. Justin Jefferson played the majority of his routes in the slot in week 1 and week 2. In week 3, they moved him to the perimeter. He played on the outside, and he played really well. This was one of the things we were worried about coming into the year with Justin Jefferson, because he only played well in the slot throughout college. But if he's able to play well on the outside, this is good news for Thielen. This is good news for Jefferson, good news for the Vikings offense as a whole. I'm comfortable throwing all 3 of those guys out there this week. Should be a smash play for all of them. Kirk Cousins, throwing too many interceptions for me to like him. If you're in an absolute desperate situation in a 2-quarterback league, you can throw him out there again, but probably not trying to jam him into my lineup with a 1-quarterback league. There's no one else on this offense I trust right now, and I'm definitely not throwing the Vikings defense. At this point, I don't know that there's going to be a game that I'm playing the Vikings defense, because they're just bad. All right, on the Texans side, you've been very disappointed with Deshaun Watson. He has not lived up to his expectations of where he's been drafted, but he's had a really rough schedule. He's played the Steelers, he's played the Chiefs. I mean, both of those teams are undefeated right now, and he's also played, I can't even remember what the other team was. Sorry, brain fart. Oh, the Ravens, yeah. So he's faced 3 teams, combined record of 8-1, all really good defenses right now. So Deshaun Watson has underperformed. This is the week he gets right. Playing against the Vikings, that is the medicine that you need if you are an ailing quarterback that needs the potential to throw up a lot of points. So Deshaun Watson is going to have a great game in this one. David Johnson, as we mentioned, the Vikings are giving up, 8th most points to running backs. David Johnson has seen more opportunities than any other running back in the NFL right now. He just hasn't done much with them because, again, playing in defenses that are completely destroying the Texans. So David Johnson has a bounce-back game here. Comfortable starting both Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. I would even be comfortable throwing Randall Cobb out there if you're in a deeper league or just need a spot start. I would prefer just keeping Will Fuller and Cooks out there, but I think Randall Cobb also gives you an opportunity to score some points here. Looks like Duke Johnson will be back this week. I wait and see because he looked kind of like slow and gimpy in week 1. We'll see what he does in week 4, but probably avoid having to throw him out there in your lineup. And I know the tight ends always get red zone targets, but good luck guessing which one. I'm not going to play that game. So overall, I think the Texans will win this one. Sorry, Vikings fans, but I think this will be a very close game that ends up with the Texans on top 34-31. All right, another really good game on the slate, especially for fantasy purposes. We've got the Seattle Seahawks and the Miami Dolphins facing off in Miami. The Seattle Seahawks offense has been red hot, and their defense has been absolute trash. This should be arguably, I don't know why the over-under is lower. I think Vegas just doesn't trust the Miami Dolphins offense, but I think this will be one of the highest scoring, if not the highest scoring game on the week. Seahawks are slated to win this one by 6.5. I agree with that, but I do think the Dolphins offense will be able to put up some fight here. The Seahawks are allowing the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks, whereas the Dolphins are doing pretty close to the same, allowing the 4th most. The Seahawks are the number 1 team in terms of points allowed for the wide receivers, whereas the Dolphins are 12th. Seahawks have been okay at stopping the run, but I don't think it's based on the merits of the defense. It's more so their offense has been scoring so many points that opposing teams cannot run the ball because they're trying to constantly catch up. They've both been okay against tight ends. We'll see if Jamal Adams is out this week, but I'm not afraid of starting Mike Gesicki at all this week. I mean, this is a week where you're starting your studs. You don't need me to convince you to start Metcalf, Lockett, or Wilson. If you do, you're playing the wrong game. The real question here is the running back. Chris Carson practiced today. Looks like he actually has a decent shot at playing this week. If Chris Carson is there, if he can get in a full practice on Friday, I'll play Chris Carson. If he's out, that's where it gets interesting. So Carlos Hyde is going to be the grinder, whereas Travis Homer is going to play on third downs. I mean, Travis Homer has already played a good number of third downs up to this point anyway. I just don't really see myself wanting to start either of these guys, even in a good matchup against the Dolphins. If you're up against it, if you had to pick between these guys, I'd probably go Carlos Hyde, but hopefully Chris Carson ends up playing and you don't have to make that choice. Greg Olsen, still seeing some red zone targets, but not getting enough volume for me to really trust him. Only throw him out there if you're desperate. We're not throwing anyone else out there, and we're not playing the Seahawks defense until they show us that they can do something. On the Dolphins side, Ryan Fitzpatrick is your stream of the week, a guy that should be out there on most of your waiver wires and is going to absolutely smash this week. In Miami, there's going to be a very high-scoring game. Ryan Fitzpatrick loves these shootouts. He loves to just be able to gun it. He'll probably throw 2 or 3 picks, but maybe he'll be able to throw up 4 or 5 touchdowns in this one. Absolutely love Fitzpatrick as a streamer. Myles Gaskin, I like him because he's seen a lot of targets out of the backfield. He had like 73% of the snaps last week as well. Not getting any of the goal line work. That's all Jordan Howard, so that's a bit of the bummer there. But if you're looking for a decent running back 2 or flex play, I think Gaskin gives that to you. Devontae Parker is a locked and loaded wide receiver this week. And Preston Williams, I'm also comfortable with because, again, as we mentioned, the Seahawks are giving up the most points to fantasy receivers on the season. So fire up Parker and Williams. Also, I think you can fire up Gesicki in this one. He's been up and down thus far, but I think this will be a good game for him to rebound. Hopefully he can score a couple touchdowns in this one. Isaiah Ford, if you're in a desperate situation, I could see you throwing him out there, but Parker and Williams being the number 1 and 2 guys here, not sure how much work he's going to get here. Maybe in like a GPP play in DFS, that might be a name you throw out there if you're trying to be contrarian. He's going to be really cheap and really easy to acquire in season-long leagues, but I just don't trust him. Not throwing Howard out there for his two goal line carries to potentially snake another touchdown away from Myles Gaskin, but this running offense really is Gaskin or bust at this point. Seahawks, as I said, should win this one pretty decisively, but looking for this game to be a very high-scoring affair. I've got the Seahawks winning this one 35 to the Dolphins 31. Take a quick swig. All right, let's talk about another potential shootout here. We're looking at the Cleveland Browns and the Dallas Cowboys. This game is in Dallas. Dallas off to a 1-2 start. Could have easily been 0-3 if it wasn't for the fact that the Falcons are the best choke artists in the entire NFL. So the Cowboys need to make a statement. They need to come out and say, look, we know we're playing in a tough division, or not a tough division, I should clarify, because we're still leading it, even though we've done basically nothing to this point. We want to come out here and say, look, we played tough teams. We played the Seahawks. We played the Falcons, and we played tough offensive teams, and the Rams as well. We need to come out and win this game. We don't know what the Browns are just yet. The Browns got toasted by the Ravens, beat the Bengals and the Washington football team pretty decisively. What will they do against the Cowboys? This is a really telling game for the Browns and the Cowboys. There's a lot of implications on this game. Cowboys want to take over and not have to worry about the Eagles finding their way and coming back and stealing the NFC East away. Whereas the Browns, they need to keep their momentum going, playing in that division with both the Ravens and the Steelers. If they want any chance at sneaking into the wild card, they cannot lose games like this. So it's going to be really telling whether this is a close game or a blowout for both of these teams going forward. 56 over-under, highest on the week, I believe. I keep saying that. I can't remember. Well, I'll correct it if I'm wrong later, but Cowboys are slated to win this one by 4.5 points. And I think that makes sense. Vegas doesn't necessarily trust the Browns yet, but that's a close spread considering what we know about these two teams. Browns are allowing the sixth most points to wide receivers and the third most to tight ends, 10th most to quarterbacks. Fire up your Cowboys. Don't care about the running back points allowed. Ezekiel Elliott is an auto start every week. Cowboys are allowing the third most points to quarterbacks and the second most points to wide receivers. Fire up your Browns. Now, the real question is, what happens with the running backs? You can't bench Nick Chubb. You can't, because he gives you the opportunity. Even last week was technically a bad matchup in terms of the fact that the Washington football team have a good run defense. But I think it's more about the game script. So what we've learned thus far through 3 weeks with the Browns, when the Browns get behind, Nick Chubb is going to have a bad fantasy day. When the Browns are ahead and are able to play the kind of football that they want, averaging 30, 35 carries a game, Nick Chubb is going to be a running back one on the week. Kareem Hunt seems to be kind of game script independent, even though he's not seeing nearly as many touches as Chubb. He's been able to do enough with them, scoring touchdowns every week thus far, and has been productive. So you're starting both of these guys. I am a little worried about Chubb, though. If the Cowboys start this game off hot and can actually come out and score some points in the first half, which they've kind of struggled in terms of coming out to a hot start, I think this week they can get things right. And if the Cowboys start off scoring pretty quickly, that's bad news for Chubb, because Chubb isn't going to be able to get the amount of carries that he needs to have a solid fantasy game. Doesn't mean I'm benching him. Even if he has a lesser game from what we've seen, if he can score a touchdown, he can still be like a middle to high running back too. Kareem Hunt in that situation actually becomes more valuable, so you're starting him regardless. And as we mentioned, the Cowboys are giving up a ton of points to opposing fantasy receivers. So I know Landry has been terrible up to this point, but he was that way last year too. Through week 3, I think he was barely in the top 60 amongst receivers, and he's right there again. So I think Landry is going to have a bounce back game here in a game where the Browns are going to have to throw the ball a bit more than they've had to in the last couple weeks. Odell Beckham, I think at this point you're really hoping that he has a blow-up game against the Cowboys. We've seen him do well against the Cowboys as a Giant in years past, so hopefully he has a nice little revenge game here, if you want to call it that. And at that point, I think we're going to try to sell him in season long. Baker Mayfield, he'll probably have a decent game, but you don't need to start him unless you absolutely have to. And then Austin Hooper, the Cowboys defense allowing a lot of points to tight ends. You could talk me into it, especially in a GPP play in DFS where most people are off of Hooper at this point. I think that he's an okay start. Hopefully you have a better tight end option, but you could definitely talk me into it if you're playing Dallas Goedert and you don't have any other options. I think Austin Hooper is an interesting guy to look at on the waivers this week. On the Cowboys side, of course, you're starting Dak, you're starting Zeke, you're starting Cooper, and you're starting Gallup. The question is with Lamb. So Lamb missed a good portion of the second half last week due to an undisclosed injury. They haven't really talked about it much. I don't know if it's going to limit him at all this week. If he's full participant throughout the week, full participant on Friday, I'm still locking in Lamb to my starting lineup. If he is limited or potentially out, that would be the only way I would be considering throwing in Cedric Wilson here. Lamb is definitely the guy there, but if that injury lingers at all, that was the only reason why we saw Wilson get so many snaps last week. So I'm not going to chase points with Wilson unless Lamb's injury is more serious than they're letting on. And then, Dalton Schultz still getting targets, playing against the Browns, who are one of the worst teams against the tight end. I think it's definitely worth a start there. Cowboys defense, maybe you could convince me. If the Cowboys get off to a hot start and the Browns aren't able to keep up, then maybe they'll be an okay play, but they haven't really done anything from a fantasy perspective up to this point, so I'm probably trying to avoid them. I think the Cowboys win this one somewhat decisively. I got them winning 31-24, but if there is a blowout in this one, the Cowboys blowing out the Browns, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just not calling for it. All right, let's jump over and talk about the Cardinals and the Panthers. So we saw the Cardinals get their first loss last week on the back of Kyler Murray throwing 3 interceptions. The Panthers got their first win off of a lot of turnovers with the Chargers. So hopefully this is a get-right game for the Cardinals. Panthers don't scare me too much in this one. Their defense is a bit overrated at this point. So they're allowing the 30th most points to quarterbacks, 26th to tight ends, 19th to wide receivers. We know they're terrible against the run. That's just been what they've been for a while now. But I think all those other numbers are a bit inflated. So I think this is a good week for the Cardinals to get things right. I'm actually surprised that the spread is only 3.5. I figured the Cardinals would actually come out with a higher spread right now, so I'd be smashing the Cardinals covering right now. Cardinals defense has been okay against receivers as well. They did allow some points to Kenny Golladay last week, so we'll see. Patrick Peterson looks, still not near his old elite self, but he has been able to slow down some of those huge performances. That being said, we're starting our studs in this one. We're not gonna step away from Kenyon Drake right before he plays the second worst defense in the league against the run. If there's gonna be a week that Kenyon Drake goes off, this is most certainly gonna be it. At this point, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins they're matchup independent. Doesn't matter. You're going to be starting them every week until they prove otherwise. And I think you can start the Cardinals defense in this one. I just don't buy into the Panthers offense just yet. Teddy Bridgewater has been disappointing up to this point, and may even start to be concerned about him getting replaced by PJ Walker at some point this season. We'll see if he's able to get things together, but they have really struggled in the red zone. They've been able to get down to the 10-yard line pretty easily, and they've had to rely on their kicker far too much up to this point. It's been really upsetting for DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson and the running backs there. Teddy Bridgewater has just not been very good in the red zone. So hopefully they can get that turned around this week, but I'm not counting on it. Chase Edmonds is an interesting play if you're in a desperate situation. He has been getting a lot of receiving work, but he still hasn't come anywhere near the carry or the snap count as Kenyon Drake. So if you're in a desperate spot, I'll throw him out there. And then Andy Isabella, I don't understand with this team, like why they refuse to give him more touches. Maybe last week will prove it otherwise, but assumption of rational coaching here, I don't see them giving Andy Isabella enough touches to actually warrant a start again. He had 2 touchdowns last week, but prior to that point, he had only run 14 routes. Didn't even run that many routes last week either. He just was efficient with the routes that they gave him. So I'm not trusting him just yet. Keep him on your bench. You don't have to throw him out there in your starters. If he has another good week, then he becomes an every week start for you. But Christian Kirk is going to come back at some point, and Larry Fitzgerald still gets targets. So I'm pretty much only trusting Murray, Drake, and Hopkins in this one. On the Panthers side, you can throw Mike Davis back out there. He put up a really good week for you last week against a good defense, and I think at this point, especially if you picked him up to replace Christian McCaffrey, he's at least getting you decent points. So you're going to keep starting him. DJ Moore had a pretty disappointing week last week. I think he has a rebound game here against the Cardinals. Not worried about him. And Robbie Anderson has been one of the surprise plays of this season. They're both getting enough volume, and especially with Christian McCaffrey out. If the Cardinals come off to a hot start and the Panthers have to abandon the run, all three of these guys are going to see a ton of targets. So I like them for that reason. Curtis Samuel was interesting. He had an okay game last week, but probably not going to be forcing myself to start him unless I'm absolutely desperate. He's probably like a fringe wide receiver 4 option this week. And Panthers defense, probably not going to be playing them against the Cardinals. I think they're going to have a good rebound game after losing last week. All in all, though, I think the Cardinals win this one pretty decisively. I've got them winning this one 24-16 over the Panthers. Panthers just have to be able to get the ball in the end zone before I'm going to start trusting them to be able to perform in these games against better offenses. Okay, let's talk about one of the lower scoring games on the slate. We've got the Indianapolis Colts versus the Chicago Bears. Both of these teams have some of the more dominant fantasy defenses up to this point. The Colts are the best team at slowing down the quarterback. They're in the top 5 against the wide receivers. They're the best team against the tight end, and they're number 27 against the running back. So they've not surrendered many fantasy points across the board up to this point. Now, part of that is due to their opponents. We saw the Vikings completely implode in week 2, and then they faced the Jets last week. They did allow a good bit of fantasy points scored against them in week 1 against the Jaguars. So I think this is a bit of a skew based on who they faced, whereas the Bears have not allowed a wide receiver to score a touchdown on them yet. They've been average against the running back and tight ends. They've been very good at slowing down quarterbacks. We saw Matt Ryan come crashing back down to earth playing against the Bears last week. So I understand why this over-under is 43. I think I might even still take the under in this one. There are still some fantasy plays here. Of course, you're going to start your studs. Starting Jonathan Taylor, we're starting Allen Robinson. The real question mark is, can you trust T.Y. Hilton? I know I'm a glutton for punishment, but I'm throwing T.Y. Hilton back out there one more time. Even against a good Bears defense, there are going to be more targets heading Hilton's way. With Paris Campbell out for an indefinite period of time, Michael Pittman is now out for 6 weeks. This offense that had a lot of depth at wide receiver is now T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal as your main 1 and 2 options. So if there's any week for T.Y. Hilton to surprise, it's the week that no one's going to expect him to do well against the Bears. I'm still throwing him out there one last time. I still trust him, especially with the fact that there's going to be way more targets headed his way. Now, the Colts defense has been one of the best fantasy options on the season, and I don't know yet whether Nick Foles is the truth or he just had that one good game coming against the terrible Falcons defense. So I think the Colts defense is a really strong play in this one. Nyheim Hines is the real question mark here. So we saw week 1 in a game where the Colts were competitive and having to play from behind. Nyheim Hines was very involved. Week 2, Nyheim Hines wasn't involved at all. In week 3, he at least got 4 targets, but he wasn't involved in the run game. Depending on your situation, you might have to start him. And I think he's probably like an RB3 this week in terms of where I'm ranking him, somewhere between running back 25 and 36. I don't know that they're going to need to use him as much in this one. I don't think this would be a game where there would be like being routed and they're going to have to abandon the run altogether. So Hines isn't someone like a smash start by any means, but definitely an okay start. Zach Pascal, as we mentioned, is basically the wide receiver 2 here. He's going to see a lot of targets. I just don't know that against the Bears, I'm going to be playing an average player like Zach Pascal. And then Mo Alley-Cox is the other interesting one here. I mean, he scored 2 weeks in a row. He's looked really good out there, and the Bears have surrendered some points to the tight end. So it's not the worst play in the world, but there's probably a better option unless you're just decimated at tight end. You went out and picked up Mo Alley-Cox this week. You can throw him out there if you're in a situation where he's your best guy on your offense, but I'd rather wait this one out and make sure that he's for real. Phillip Rivers, we're not starting at any point. Neither are we playing Nick Foles. David Montgomery getting to play without Tariq Cohen is going to be a really good thing for his touches. I don't know that Cordell Patterson is going to see an uptick in too many touches here. And I think David Montgomery is going to be an every week start at this point. Allen Robinson re-established his dominance last week, and the Bears defense is also going to be a good play here. I think this is going to be a pretty low-scoring game, so look for both of these defenses to have a good fantasy day. Now, Anthony Miller, I think, is truly the best second receiver on this team, but for some reason, Matt Nagy doesn't like to give him more than 50% of the snaps, so it's really hard to trust the low volume there, especially in a lower-scoring game. Darnell Mooney still not consistent enough for us to trust him. You might be tempted to throw Jimmy Graham back out there, but playing against the defense that has allowed the least amount of points to opposing fantasy tight ends. They played some decent ones up to this point. I'm not going to go back out there. I feel like that's point chasing at this point. If you got Jimmy Graham, try to keep him on your bench unless you absolutely have to start him. And then, as I mentioned, probably not going to be playing Nick Foles, at least until he proves to us that last week wasn't a one-week wonder. So I think the Colts can win this one, even on the road. I got the Colts winning 21-17 over the Bears, expecting this to be a pretty low-scoring affair overall. Not going to get too cute with who we're starting in this one. All right, and let's jump over and talk about the last game on the early game slate, the last 11 o'clock game. Ravens versus Washington. Man, if the Ravens do not come out and just blow them out, I will be shocked. Shocked, I tell you. The Ravens are going to be pissed. After getting their teeth kicked in against the Chiefs on Monday night, there's no way they don't come back out with a fire under their butts and just completely obliterate Washington at this point. Yeah, and Vegas thinks so as well. So last week, the Colts were 11.5-point favorites over the Jets. The Ravens are 12-point favorites over Washington. Blah. Like, the Ravens are going to absolutely stomp Washington in this one, and if they don't, again, I will be shocked. Don't need to tell you too much. The Ravens have a good defense. Washington has a decent defense as well, with the exception of the tight end position, which means Mark Andrews is going to come back. If you can buy Mark Andrews low right now, this is the last moment you're probably going to get a chance. You find that owner that went after Mark Andrews early and is kicking himself for taking Mark Andrews over Tyler Lockett. See if you can sneak Mark Andrews into a trade before Sunday, because this is probably going to be the last chance you get. Ravens, of course, you're starting Lamar Jackson. I should not have to preface that, but this is a good rebound game for him. Marquise Brown was so close to having 2 really big bomb touchdowns. If there's going to be a blow-up game, it's coming, and I think Washington is a good avenue for that to happen. Again, Mark Andrews, great play this week. I think he's going to absolutely dominate, and I think the Ravens defense probably a good chance at scoring a defensive touchdown in this one. The running game is the real question mark. Can you trust Mark Ingram or J.K. Dobbins? Not really. I mean, Gus Edwards out-touched them on Monday night, but that was a different game script. One of these guys probably going to get a rushing touchdown or 2, but it's kind of a flip of the coin to try to guess who. I mean, if we're just based on what I've seen, Mark Ingram looks washed. I think at some point, J.K. Dobbins does take over this backfield and Gus Edwards spells him on like third downs and stuff. But until Mark Ingram can actually show that he still is worthy of being out there, I think eventually the Ravens are going to phase him out of this offense. But as it stands right now, he's still the lead guy. So if you had to pick one, I guess I would go with Ingram, but I don't feel good about it. I just don't feel good about it. Willie Snead or Miles Boykin might have a big play in this one, but I'm not throwing them out there unless you're like playing a GPP. But on Washington's side, I'm really only playing McLaurin. The Ravens defense has been really good against the run outside of the game against the Chiefs. So Antonio Gibson is out for me. Yeah, he's not seeing nearly enough targets to be able to face against this good game script. They've been using J.D. McKissick in passing down situations. So I'm concerned for the touches that Gibson is going to get in this one. And then Logan Thomas should be a good play, but Dwayne Haskins just looks like a complete bust at this point. So I think we're just going to hang on to Logan Thomas until Alex Smith starts playing, because I think that will be a good boost for him to start seeing some decent targets there. He's still being one of the most targeted tight ends in the league right now, but it just hasn't turned into anything because Dwayne Haskins is just not playing very well. I'm not playing any of the other running backs here or any of the other receivers, and I don't know why I put Browns defense. I'm sorry. It's not the Browns defense, it's Washington's defense, but we are not playing Washington's defense against the Ravens, even at home. I've got the Ravens completely routing Washington 34-17 in this one. That is my prediction, and that is the last game on the slate. Thank you guys for watching. I am tired of talking, but hopefully you guys got some good information out of this. Be sure to join us tomorrow night. We'll be talking about the late games after the Thursday night game. We'll recap that one real quick, and then we'll talk about the rest of the games on the slate, getting you guys all the information that you need in terms of who to start and sit on the week, and give you guys our prediction of who we think will win each and every single game. So thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will see you tomorrow.